One of my favorite topics, guys. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you know this topic comes up a lot on my timeline or on my stories, which is literally Kunyaza. And today we've got an amazing guest here with us. We've got Habeeb Akande, and he wrote a whole book, guys. A whole book on Kunyaza. Kunyaza, the secrets to female pleasure. And I'm so excited to interview him, discuss it a little bit, let us learn a little bit about Kunyaza and see whether our knowledge is up to date, and let's see what else we can add to that. So, welcome, Habeeb.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm well. Come a bit closer to the mic. Don't be shy. Yeah. So for the audience that don't know you, just have a little bit of an introduction as first.
Sure. So my name is Habeeb Akande. I'm a sex educator and sex researcher. I'm also the author of 6 books. My latest book is called Kunyaza, The Secret to Female Pleasure, which is basically a book which explores an ancient African technique called Kunyaza, which is a heterosexual practice which facilitates female ejaculation, also known as squirting. It's an ancient practice, like I mentioned, that's been practiced for hundreds of years. It started in Rwandan, East Central Africa, but it's also practiced in other parts of Africa like Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, and even where I'm from originally in parts of Nigeria and Ghana as well. So and the reason why I wanted to write this book, because I not only wanted to acknowledge and celebrate an ancient African technique, but one which the onus is on satisfying women. I think especially in this society in the West, where sex is kind of seen as a performative act where women should satisfy men. I was astounded to come across a culture and a practice where the onus is on the man to make sure that his female partner is satisfied, and ultimately her pleasure comes first. And I think there's a lot of things that us in the West can learn, especially given that much of our sexual education comes from pornography, which is, I would say, miseducation. Whereas you've got a practice and technique, shall we say, to the pleasure and experience climax. So for me, it would again an empowering practice which both men and women can benefit from. I think it's also good that we've got a practice from our continent in Africa, the motherland, which many other cultures can kind of hear and learn from, because we always, I mean, especially as Africans, if I was to ask generally people, what do you think about when you hear African sexual practices? Many people might say, FGM, or women being oppressed and things like that. And unfortunately, these practices do happen in some parts of Africa, but you've also got a female positive or pleasure positive practice, which is empowering women, and it's also teaching men how they should be patient and attend to women's desires. So again, that's why for me, Kunyaza is a beautiful practice. And you've got many African women who are known as singers, who traditionally teach this practice to women and girls in preparation for marriage. And then on the other side... Okay,
wait, hold up. You're just literally going straight... You just went straight into it. And it's fine, because obviously we wanted to just get a little bit more of a footing of understanding, because obviously this is a Rwandan practice, and you said you're from Nigeria as well, and you briefly mentioned that in Nigeria you guys practice it too. That's the first time I've heard of it, like that in Nigeria and Ghana they've practiced this, because I have certain Ghanaian friends that are aware of Kunyaza, but it's only because they traveled to Rwanda and found out, and Uganda, and they found out about Kunyaza there. But it's interesting that you're saying that you guys have this practice in Nigeria. Can you explain it a little bit? Because to my understanding, it was just an East African practice. Yeah, so
the Nigerians that practice it is practiced in parts of northern Nigeria, where we've got an ancient, you could say, sexual practice or tradition called Kayan Mata, which refers to natural aphrodisiacs, and this is where women teach women. They provide concoctions in terms of how they can heighten desire, cultivate desire, and obviously enjoy more pleasurable relationships. And they learn from other cultures, and they came across, like I've spoke to a number of Nigerian women who speak about Kunyaza, but obviously the Kunyaza that they teach is from Rwanda, so it's not like a Nigerian version, shall we say, of Kunyaza. So that's where a number of Nigerians that I'm aware of how they teach it is from the Kunyaza is from the Rwandans that they've learned about their practice. And since the documentary Sacred Water came out in 2016, and there's been a number of articles about Kunyaza, I think a number of people, even as far as Brazil, there's Brazilians that practice Kunyaza as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is amazing. And it just shows how we globally are just interlinked anyway. So, and it's about taking the good of something, highlighting it, and letting it like seep elsewhere. I think it's amazing because obviously you touched on the our ideologies when we think about Africans and sex, and it's always like negative, where the female is oppressed or she has FGM. Is it FGMF? FGMF?
Yeah. So even can I just touch on that as well? So even with female genital FGM, known as female genital mutilation, I think it's important that we as Africans understand what it is and who defines it, because there is another practice in Rwanda and also parts of Gukuna, which refers to labia elongation or labia stretching. Now, when the World Health Organization, when they found out about this practice, they initially classified it as FGM, as female genital mutilation. Then when a number of Africans they said it's not a form of mutilation, and they reclassified it and called it female genital modification. So sometimes but then the question is, who are the World Health Organization, which obviously predominantly made up of Europeans, to define what is acceptable and unacceptable practices? Do you understand what I'm getting? As long as the practice is, as long as a woman gives her consent and she's happy with it, I've got no issue with it. But I find it problematic that we always rely on Europeans or Westerners to define what is appropriate sexual practices. Precisely. Yeah, so for me, with FGM, don't get me wrong, I'm not for any form of FGM, but I just think it's important that we, as Africans in particular, when we're hearing some of these terms, we need to make sure we understand who defines what is FGM and what's not FGM, because I even read an article not so long ago where they were trying to reclassify male circumcision to be a form of genital mutilation as well.
Really?
Right, exactly. So if the World Health Organization has turned around and says, okay, male circumcision, because it's not done for any health reasons, and it's a form of genital mutilation, are we going to subscribe to that?
No. But this is the thing. So that means this is why I'm saying that things like this, you highlighting something that is good, the way I see it is like it's a hidden diamond, and you highlighting the hidden diamond, bringing it to light, allowing people to see it. Obviously not everyone is gonna agree to this at first glance. I mean, my mother to this day, she always questions why I'm doing this, why I'm talking about this, and I'm like, listen, this is our culture, I'm gonna talk about it. And like we're saying off air, that we're, as Africans, sometimes we're very easy, or we are very susceptible to adapt other people's culture and then forget about our own. For example, my mom, she loves like the Korean culture, she loves the Indian culture and so forth. And they have their own thing. They have Kama Sutra, and they have not tantric sex as well. So why would you like kind of embrace another person's culture, and then when you have your own thing, it's like kind of like nah. But I think it's the mentality of that generation, and I'm loving the fact that this new generation is coming in, is digging deep, finding these gems, bringing them to light, and having these open conversations. So yeah.
No, I agree 100%, and I think that even growing up, I'm going to kind of show my age. I was born in the mid-80s. It wasn't so cool to be African, and then obviously people wanted to try and be, maybe say they're from the West Indies, or even say they're South American and things like that. Then when you travel and you speak to people from different parts of the world, and even in parts of South America like in Brazil, where a lot of people are Brazilians, a lot of their culture comes from Africa, and they celebrate the African heritage. So I just think it's important, and I do, kudos to you in the work that you're doing. You're highlighting and trying to and celebrating not only the contributions that Africans have made in the past, but that we're making now. Because I think it's one thing to talk about how great we was in the past and the things that we've contributed, but it's also to highlight and celebrate what we're doing now, because obviously we're making history. So I think that's important as well.
Precisely. I appreciate that. So in all honesty, what even inspired you to become a sexual educator?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I grew up in an environment where, in my household, or not my immediate household, but my elder uncles and cousins, we spoke about sex quite freely, like in terms of how you spoke. Some of it was quite egotistical, if I'm honest, in the sense of how a man's supposed to perform in a bedroom, and obviously you got these you could say these pressures in terms of how you should be with women, right? So the subject of sex was never really kind of seen as taboo for me growing up. And then after I graduated from university and I went to Egypt for 3.5 years, I came across a number of books written in Arabic about sex and sexuality from an Arab Muslim perspective, and I thought actually this would be quite interesting because we don't really hear Muslims speaking about sex. So I translated some of that, and then I wrote a book called A Taste of Honey, which explored sex and sexuality, also known as erotology from an Islamic perspective. When that book came out, and then I wrote 2 other books, but directed at men about how they should treat women and things like that, in a sexual perspective and also relationship perspective. Someone emailed me. I actually remember the date, on 8th of August 2016. I think it was 2016 or 15, and then asked me why didn't I mention Kunyaza, given that I'm an African and I wanted to celebrate Africans. And I was like, I did my Googles. I came across his practice and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And at the time, there was a documentary that was being co-funded by Olivier Jourdan, the Sacred Water documentary. So I reached out to him. I reached out to a couple of my friends. I've got a couple of friends from Uganda and someone from Rwanda as well, to hear more about this practice. And what I came across was that, because I thought there would be a book. There was a number of articles, but there wasn't any books. And I thought, okay, rather than kind of complain, because I was thinking, how come there isn't a book? We should know about this. I thought, okay, let me try and do some research and put in the form of a book. So not only to document this heritage and this tradition, but also to pay homage to the African women in particular who started it and who are continuing to teach it. So one thing, even though yes, I'm not from Rwanda and obviously I'm a man and I'm writing it, I try to make it very clear that I'm paying homage to the women who started this practice and I'll continue to teach it, because I think one thing that nowadays, and I've noticed in the last couple of years, is that Kunyaza has been whitewashed as well. So there's a number of articles I've seen in German, French, where I've even given some interviews with people, and then all of a sudden, again, they don't need to show my face, but at least show a black face. I'm seeing white people.
I know. I was even going to mention there's a book actually in German, the Kunyaza version, and I'm reading it, but sometimes I just have to put it down because it's like even like the picture on it. It doesn't represent me. It doesn't. I get the way they made it elusive, so you don't realize it straight away who is in the picture. But when you actually look at the picture, it's not. But I guess because it's marketing, right? And I understand in a way why they're doing it, because as Africans, sometimes we're not quick to accept that until it's been whitewashed or until it's had a white stamp on it. So essentially, that's why they're marketing to the Europeans. Then they get the stamp, and then everyone else be like, yeah, this makes sense. But sometimes by that time it's a bit too late because it's not our thing anymore.
I hear what you're saying, and even that was some of the reservations when I was marketing the book, and I was thinking about the book cover, because it's like, essentially, if you have a phenotypically black African woman and you're obviously going with certain publishers, they might be like, we want to make it more universal, and they'll try and put a European looking woman, which is, again, not that something I necessarily agree with, but I understand why it's done. And sometimes as a writer, you don't have control in terms of how the book is designed. So I'm giving the person the benefit of the doubt. And I think I've read the book that you're referring to, and to be fair, you do see a black African in his picture. But again, I think he's based in Germany or Belgium, so I can understand it. Like you said, if you're marketing to predominantly Europeans and you're not in control of publishing the book, then that's kind of like what can happen, to be honest.
Precisely, but I did like the illustrations in it because they were African in there, and I think it's funny because I remember because when I'm reading the book and it's just laying it down around, my mum be like, "Oh, what are you reading?" And she's like, "Why are you reading this stuff?" And I'm just like, "But this is actually scientific. There's scientific evidence in here. I don't know why you're But I think if there was to be, or if I was to show her actually the BBC documentary, I think once she sees that, she'll be like, But just because it came here, it's been packaged, and now it's come back. So that's when she will start to assimilate the information. But anyway, the way I see it personally, the older generation, you're not really there to change them. We can just learn from them. We can take the wisdom that they have, assimilate it, and make sure that we've got it for the next generations that are coming. And I think it's amazing because it starts with things like this, because how can Kunyaza not be documented? And it's interesting that you mentioned the sexual practices in Islam, because on Clubhouse, I have a club called Rwandan Hub. And we always have like Rwandan different conversation. Obviously, we had Kunyaza at one point. And what came up is that the Rwandan Muslims were very in tune. They were very aware of these practices. And sexually, they've been taught more than the Christians. And it kept on coming up in the rooms. And we were just like, how is it? They would have kitchen parties. The women would teach like the young girls obviously about Kunyaza, and they would teach them about Gukuna. And then us the Christians, we would just hear like, what's the kitchen party? You know, and I don't know why do you think that is? Because obviously you've written a book on Islam and sexuality. So could you like highlight that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. And I think that was something, since the colonization of much of the African world, I think a number of Africans, we've adopted a Victorian Christian understanding about sex and sexuality, that sex is seen to be something which is dirty, shameful, something which you don't really speak about even within the confines of marriage. Whereas in contrast, from an Islamic perspective, sex obviously within the confines of marriage is seen to be a spiritual act and something that both the man and the woman can enjoy, and it's supposed to be mutually pleasurable. And like I mentioned, there's a history of Muslims writing about sex and sexuality. So from an Islamic perspective, sex is not a taboo, even though it may be taboo in some Muslim cultures. So that's why you might find a difference in terms of the Rwandan Muslim women that you came across speaking about, Kunyaza and Kukuna, because it's not seen as taboo and they embrace it. Whereas unfortunately a number of Christians, not only in Rwanda but parts of Africa, even in Nigeria, sex is kind of seen as a taboo, that you only do it for procreation purposes, not for pleasure, not for recreation purposes. So it comes down to the understanding of sex and sexuality, again, especially if you've come from a prudish Christian upbringing, then sex is something that, again, you just literally do the same way when you use the lavatory, something that you do to exercise the need, and then you don't really talk too much about it. So that's maybe why there's differences in terms of the way Christians in Rwanda and Muslims in Rwanda speak about practices like Kunyaza.
Yeah, I mean, precisely. Even there was one thing that came up, which was we were thinking about, so, okay, we know we've been colonized and we know, like, the missionaries came in, but it seemed like the Muslims were allowed to keep more of their culture, because that's what we came in that room. That was the conclusion, because it wasn't just like the women, even the men had their version, the Muslim men had their version. So we were like, yeah, so it looks like, yeah, they have the religion, but they were allowed to keep some of their culture.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, actually, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So obviously I'm a Muslim as well, obviously from Nigeria. So as a Nigerian Muslim, how, apart from obviously the way you pray and stuff is the same, but in terms of my cultures as a Nigerian, it's different to an East African or a Pakistani or a British person, but we're all Muslim. And that's something that Islam does embrace people to keep their culture. So that's why I won't be surprised that, yes, you do have Rwandan Muslims that still practice their culture, but are still Muslim. So they're still proudly Muslim and stick to their religion, but still embrace their culture. Whereas I've seen with a number of Christians, not only in the African continent, but also in parts of South America as well, where they feel that by becoming a Christian, you have to adopt the European culture somewhere, their views and attitudes to the way they see sex and sexuality. So that can be problematic because, again, especially if you've got, and that comes down to what I mentioned earlier about Victorian Christian sexual morality, because it's how they view, even when people talk about modest or acceptable behaviour, or even types of clothing which is appropriate, if you're following one ideal or one culture, one custom, and you're trying to impose that on another, you're going to be doing a disservice to the other culture, because not everyone is the same. Even physically, we're not the same.
Precisely.
Do you understand what I'm getting at? So that's why I think it's important that, but again, actually, I can't speak on behalf of Christians, but I think it's important that we embrace different cultures if you can, or at least you can embrace your own culture first and foremost, because that's where naturally you feel comfortable in your own skin.
Precisely. I can speak on Christians, and I think definitely like the whole whitewash sometimes is extreme. You have Christians that will still hold their practice or their culture and are Christians, but it's really, really rare. And it's like, if I was looking at percentage, it will be less than 10%. Whereas with Muslims, I feel like 90% keep their culture, you know, so it's the flip side. And I don't think that you should forget who you are. That's definitely, and I think that's a beautiful thing, to be able to practice your religion and still have your identity. And I think even like when you look at Rwandan culture, Kunyaza sometimes is not looked down upon by certain generations, but like seen as dirty because it doesn't fit the missionary Christian narrative. It's like, why are you doing that? That's evil. Or why are you doing that? It's dirty. And then when you start digging deeper into the culture, you even realize that I forgot what the mat is called now, but when you get married, at the end of marriage, they give you this mat. I don't know if you came across it.
I've come across it,
yeah. And usually everyone has this mat in their house, but we as kids, we didn't know what it was for. Mm-hmm. We used to use it like, you know, when you had family gathering and the kids would eat on the floor, so you put the mat down and kids eat there and the parents would be on the dining room. To find out this mat was used for kunyaza, so that the bed would not get messed up, that it won't. And I only found this out when I went to Rwanda and I went to the Nyanza castle or palace, and they were explaining things to us. And I was like, oh, I remember this. I had this in my house. And then he's like, yeah, this is what you put. And I was like, what? You know, and it's there. It's in plain sight. History is in plain sight. But because it's been seen as something negative, no one talks about it, and maybe even gets lost in people's minds. Because sometimes I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, you're right, you know, and I'm like, what? You forgot that this is what it's supposed to be used for? So yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I just think again why it's important, because I think generally with a lot of African cultures, because we pass knowledge orally, if there's not things that's documented, people that's not part of that culture, they wouldn't be aware of it, and then obviously there'll be that disconnect. That's why I think number one, it's important that we document our culture and some of these practices, and also not be afraid to pass down our experiences, because like what you've seen and what you grew up and what you saw about the mattress, that was normal to you, but you didn't think about it. Whereas for someone else, it was like, oh well, it's like a eureka moment. I didn't know that. And there are people that actually, because there was a really interesting article by someone who went to Kunyaza, and he was buying these mats, and then he was now trying to commercialize it.
Yeah.
So, but for me, it was like, I just had an issue that, okay, again, we've got another example of someone outside of the culture trying to commercialize black culture. But for me, he just found it quite liberating, that because there's a number of people, especially women in the West, who feel that they're not able to let the water flow because they've been told that this is urine, and they've been ashamed about their experiences. Yeah. Whereas they've gone to another culture, heard about another culture where that's not the case. And this is where a cross-cultural exchange is really important, because you can learn from some of the issues or the sexual hang-ups that people have in one culture. It might not necessarily exist in another. So that's why I just think it's important that we kind of learn from each other and again embrace our own culture and heritage.
Perfect. We've got Urija, and she said she's going to speak to her elder aunties if they know about this practice, because this is so interesting. See, this is good. This is great. And let us know what they say when you speak to them.
Also, do you know that in Uganda it's called Kachabali? So if Kachabali. So it's and in Zimbabwe, it's my friend from Zimbabwe. He was like, yeah, I know about it, but it's called Katerero, I think it's called. Yeah, so it's interesting that you have, and again for me, it's that the fact that you've got this practice, which is the man's concentrating on satisfying his wife or his female partner. It's very different from obviously what we're used to from the Western world, where it's all about penetrative intercourse, and then you're just going at it like a rabbit. So,
And that's it. That's what people say. If the person hasn't got rhythm, it's not going to be great. Yeah. So, but then even that, if you look at that connotation that in sex you're supposed to have rhythm, which shows you're supposed to be spiritual, because music is rhythm, music is a spiritual, language as well. So in my head as well, for me, that's why it doesn't make sense sometimes when it's like everything is spiritual. You pray over food. Like me, for example, I always ask for blessings before sex. And when I talk to my friends about it, and these are like my close friends that know me inside out, they're like, what? why would you do that? And they have that Christian ideology that sex is bad. They're like, I can't ask for blessings. I'm doing something bad already. So, it's kind of like the unlearning process needs to happen. And personally, I had to go through that, because at a certain point I was like, oh yeah, this is bad. But then I was like, no, but if you're made in the image of the Creator, if you are this creative being, why would He put something bad in you? There's nothing bad in you. It's only what you perceive as bad will become bad. And once you have that moment, that eureka moment, and you're sexually liberated and you actually accept yourself wholeheartedly, it's a completely different experience. And asking for blessings before sex, praying before sex, I think is so important. And I think I recently also posted Dr. Layla Africa, rest in power, who also spoke about, pray before sex, because this is a sacred spiritual African practice. It's not mechanical. The only reason we saw it as mechanical is because when during the slave trade, you had to have more babies. The more babies you had, the more stock you had, the more money the master had. So that's why it was a mechanical practice. But it's not mechanical. It's supposed to be a spiritual union. And if you're not procreating a child, you have that co-creation of energy there that is creating something else. That's what you can manifest during sex. Like, personally, I've manifested a lot of things during sex, but that's another topic. But you create, it's an energy of creation, so use that energy wisely.
No, that's really interesting, because in the Islamic tradition, we also have you're supposed to pray before you have sexual relations as well. So
that's what Orija just literally said. She says, yes, in the Islamic practice, we have that where you're supposed to pray before intimacy. Yeah, so and even, like you said, it's like when we're looking at sex, I think unfortunately, sex, actually the mechanics of it is more to it than that. So I think that's why we don't really hear much about intimacy. Yeah.
And emotional intimacy as well, because again, especially when you're just thinking about sex being just penetrative intercourse and it lasts until the man ejaculates, then it can be a quite redundant act itself. Whereas when you're looking at it more holistically and seeing it encompasses emotional intimacy, it encompasses connection of the body and the soul, and also where someone can experience and enjoy pleasures that's above this world, then again you look at it in a totally different light. But I just think our sex education generally just looks at the biology of sex and the mechanics of sex. I'm not looking at whether it's the philosophies or the spirituality or some of the sacred teachers about sex, which again you do get from many of the ancient cultures. And even with many people, for example, bring up the Kama Sutra.
Yeah,
that's a religious textbook. People think it's just about sex when only 25% of the book actually deals with sex positions.
Wow.
Whereas when you were to ask anyone about the Kama Sutra, they just think it's about sex positions. And the man that wrote the Kama Sutra, you could say, I wouldn't even say it's like a modern day or an ancient version of Cosmopolitan, because he's not only speaking about sex, he's speaking about love, he's speaking about compatibility, he's speaking about what men look for in women, what women look for in men, about the sacredness of sex. So but unfortunately, when it was translated in the 19th century by Richard Burton, and he introduced it to the Europeans and then in America, they just concentrated on the sex positions because they were like living in the dark ages, and for them it was like, wow, all of these different positions, and that's what became the focal point. And they left, you could arguably say, the substance of the book. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So that's why I think it's important that we as black people, Africans, we control our own narrative. And even when you're speaking about some of our practices, whether it's Kunyaza or what have you, you're not just speaking about the technique or practice itself, you're speaking about everything that comes with it and understanding the culture. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, people who do not respect the heritage of some of these practices, they do a disservice by just giving the highlight, so to speak.
Precisely, and like you mentioned it now, when you think about Kama Sutra now in the West, it's like you think about the mechanical side, like the positions, and not knowing that these different positions bring or enhance different energies, which make it more suitable or sustainable or whatnot. Because I even got this deck, which was like a Kama Sutra deck. And when I opened the deck, there was, like you were saying, it was only like 25% were like positions, and the rest was talking about virtues, was talking about compatibility, was talking about it was very emotive because there was a lot of emotion in it, and I was just like, this is beautiful, literally beautiful. And it's just sad that sometimes things get repackaged and then lost. Like, for example, even yoga. If you think about yoga right now, you're thinking about someone in California drinking some kale juice and going to yoga to keep fit. but yoga is not about that. Yoga is about mind, body, soul connection. When you do your practice yoga, you're aligning yourself to the frequencies of the universe. There's certain yoga positions that will help charge you up. There's certain yoga positions that will help dial you down. And it's a mindful practice, but it's just been taken, repackaged, and sent out like through the Californian channels to the world. Do you know what I mean? So it's like kind of like the little well, not a version of a hipster, but like kind of like the hipster practice of exercise. And it's a bit sad because I don't know, like personally I practice yoga, but when I tell people about yoga, I don't tell them, oh, this is good for my body. I'm more like, try it and see. Same with meditation. Like, meditation has done amazing things for me, but I can show you or can tell you what happened, but you can only try it for yourself and then see. So, and I love those kind of practices because it gives power back to the person. It's not this thing has the power. It's you have the power. This is just a tool that enhances the power you have. And even with this Kunyaza, that is why I love it, because it's giving power to the person. You have the power. This is the tool. Utilize it to have power. And even if we look at Kunyaza and how it came about, the story was obviously that the king was away in war, and then the queen wanted her servant to sleep with her, and the servant was very nervous and shaking, that he was shaking outside of her vagina on her clitoris, and then she ended up waterfalling, and then she thought, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, I cannot believe this, like it was the most amazing sex she had. And then ever since then, Kunyaza came into play. Is that what you've heard as well?
Yes, that is, that is exactly what I've heard. I think what's amazing about that story is that a number of things. One, she initiated sexual contact, which again, you kind of see it's rare.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into the morality of obviously her having sex with, or trying to initiate sex without her husband, but that's something else. But she gave herself permission to experience pleasure.
Precisely.
And that's something that we don't really hear about nowadays, where it's like a woman sees, or she's been socially conditioned to believe that sex is for the man and he has to pleasure her, whereas she experienced pleasure on her own terms. And I think that's something that a lot of women can find empowering from that story on so many levels. So for me, again, hearing that story, and I do retell it a number of times, a lot of people are fascinated by it because, again, it's the fact that you've got a sexually empowered woman that was not only demanding to be pleasured, but then after she was satisfied and she waterfalled, she then told her husband when he came back, this is how I want to be satisfied.
Exactly.
So she was not only the one that was empowered, but she was educated as well. So there's so much we can learn from that story. And I just think, again, it's just another testament to the wonderful contributions that Africans have made, and especially African women.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's not highlighted enough. So rather than waiting for others to do so, I just think it's important that we just take it upon ourselves to kind of re-educate the masses about the contributions that our ancestors have made.
Precisely. Were we just saying, let me take the power back, ladies? So, and then obviously we were talking about how it came about. And one interesting thing that I found out as well about Kunyaza, which I thought was amazing, and I was like, oh my days. So basically, when you used to get married back in the days, we still have dowry, you come and pay for your wife, or, you contribute to your wife. And then you go to your husband's house now, obviously. And then if the husband fails to make the woman waterfall or squirt, she can get a refund on the marriage. So she can be like, no, he's not doing his job. Marriage annulled. And I think that is so powerful, and especially because it was back then. It's not something that we're talking about now in this present time. We're talking about like 400 years ago, where you could get your money back, or you could get a refund on your marriage, because the man didn't satisfy you. And I think that goes to show, when you have a balance in gender roles, and you acknowledge that everything is a co-partnership, things work better. So, because these days, I mean, obviously a lot of people get divorced, but you don't hear in a divorce court, I want a refund on the marriage because he doesn't satisfy me. That's okay, you might hear it, but it's not a legitimate reason, so to speak.
No, I hear you, and I think what's fascinating as well by that is the fact that, because if we were to judge how it is in the Western world, that sex begins and ends when the man is satisfied, and generally, for men to experience an ejaculation to be satisfied is relatively straightforward and easy, whereas with women, it's the man generally has to pay more attention.
Yeah.
And the reason why that's wonderful, like you've got the woman that the man has to satisfy the woman, is that obviously in order for him not to have the marriage annulled, we need to make sure that he's spending the time to explore her body, understand how she likes to be turned on and how she likes to be satisfied. So it's going to be, because again more pressure is placed on the man. I think that's a good thing, because if pressure is placed on, like for example, the woman that she needs to orgasm during penetrative intercourse, how it's placed in the Western world, a lot of women will naturally fall short, because most women don't climax by that way. They need stimulation of the clitoris, which generally is not really done via penetrative intercourse. Whereas if the onus is placed on the man that, okay, if you don't make the woman's waterfall, don't make her squirt, don't make her feel at ease, don't make her feel comfortable, and obviously she's given herself permission to experience pleasure, then I think you'll find more, maybe you find less, even if you probably find less divorces or breakups.
Yeah.
But also what is great is that there's no shame placed upon a woman if she wants to seek a divorce because she's not sexually satisfied. And that's something that I took from my research of Kunyaza and the Rwandan, or the ancient Rwandan culture and tradition, is that women are entitled to sexual pleasure, which is something that it's amazing that despite sexual liberation which took place in the 1970s, it's something that Western women are now trying to discover, that we are entitled to sexual pleasure. Precisely. Whereas you've got African women that was well aware of this hundreds of years ago. And the thing is, for many of our elders that grew up in that tradition, that were well aware of it, for them it's normal.
Yeah.
But they don't understand that there are a number of women who might be educated and all the rest of it, but they're not aware that they're entitled to sexual pleasure. And like you said, it's rare if you were to find a woman to say the reasons why we broke up was because he didn't satisfy me in the bedroom. Yeah. Because they don't feel empowered to say that. Whereas men will say that because we feel entitled to sexual satisfaction. So if I'm in a relationship, I'm not being satisfied, I'll say, yeah, she wasn't good in bed. Whereas you rarely hear that from a woman. And if a woman were to say that, unfortunately, she'll be shamed and called all sorts of names. Whereas, like you mentioned, in ancient or traditional Rwandan culture, that was normal.
Precisely. And I think it's empowering, and we need to have those open conversations, because even not everyone is as open. So obviously you have, like you were saying, women that are doing they're in high positions, that are doing very well, but when it comes to that part, they feel like they're boxed in just because of how things the narrative that's been going on for so long. And some of my friends that I'm talking about that feel like they can't pray before sex. If you see them, they're the most confident, outgoing people. They, smash all their goals every single year, or they overachievers. But when it comes to sex, it was almost like they shrink. Yeah. And I think it's really, really sad, because this is who you are. Why are you shrinking? Because of who you are. Yeah,
I think unfortunately there aren't enough, and again, kudos to you for the work that you're doing. There's not enough safe spaces where women can speak openly and freely, especially about intimate subjects like sex. So women can speak about their career and some of the concerns that they've got. They can speak about motherhood. They can speak about relationships and some of the issues that they're having. But in terms of intimacy issues, that's something that unfortunately not a lot of women feel comfortable to kind of speak openly, honestly about. And I think that it's important that we normalise these conversations where we can speak about sex, we can speak about some of the sexual problems that women face, whether it's low desire, whether it's inability or struggling to orgasm, or trying to climax, or trying to get out of their head, because I think unfortunately a lot of women suffer from sexual anxiety, and I've got this self-critical voice where they're thinking about how he's going to perceive me, what does he think about my body, the way I look, the way I my vaginal fluids and things like that. So I think it's important that we create safe spaces where women feel empowered, where they can have this. And this was something that we did have, and we still do have in many traditional African countries, where women are able to speak freely amongst themselves, and they're not, they don't feel belittled or ashamed to kind of speak about intimacy issues.
I think we've got a few questions here. So we've got Ellie B says, entitlement to sexual pleasure. Wish most women knew about this. Ellie Dad says Habeeb is preaching. And then we have Rija, she's asking, my question to Habeeb, why are there not enough men speaking about women sexual pleasure?
That's a very good question. I think a number of us are ignorant, and I'm putting myself within that. I think a number of us, we've got ego where we've been, like I mentioned earlier, been misinformed about sex. So as long I'm able to satisfy myself, then she should be satisfied. From what we hear about from porn, sex is all about performance. So as long as I'm able to last, as long as I've got a relatively large size member, I can last a certain amount of time, and so we've fed into the sexual script that we've heard from pornography. So for us, women are satisfied because we've replicated what we've seen in porn, and unfortunately, if I'm going to be honest, a number of women fake pleasure, fake orgasms. So because of that, they think they're doing a good job. So if you were to ask most men, they do think we've been led to believe that we're normal. We're not normal, we're great in the bedroom. And one of the differences I think I've experienced when I'm speaking to men and women about sex, a lot of men ask, how can I become a better lover? How can I become better in the bedroom? Whereas a lot of women, when they contact me, it's always, am I normal? It's a total different. So they're looking at it like, am I okay? How could I be? And they're comparing themselves to how can I just be normal? Whereas a lot of men, it's not a case of we think we're normal. We think, how can we be the best lover in the bedroom? How can we be better than X, Y, Z? Do you understand what I'm getting? And again, I think it's because men from a relatively young age, we feel entitled not only to sex but sexual pleasure. Whereas I think with women, maybe women feel entitled to love, but not necessarily to sexual gratification. So I think it's about changing the having a mind shift change where men and women do feel empowered, where they can actually have these open and honest conversations with one another. But I just think as a lot of men, our ego gets in the way with allowing us to be open and vulnerable to kind of understand that I don't know everything in the bedroom. And of course I won't know everything about my partner, and even I wouldn't know everything about what satisfies her, what turns on, because she can change. But we haven't created that environment where men are challenged. And that's why I think it's important we have these conversations, not only in public, but as couples. So there are people that will contact me and ask me all of these questions, and the first question I'll ask is, especially with the women, have you had this conversation with your partner? No. And it's like, how do you expect anything to change if you don't speak to them? And some of it, they don't feel open and comfortable to speak to, which I understand. But if you're not communicating effectively, it's going to be very difficult for anything to change.
But I think this is where personal accountability comes into place. Me, even personally, I value communication in any relationship. This is my friendships, my intimate relationships. So I had to learn as well. If I can be and check myself and check other people and be as honest in other parts, this is a part I should be able to be open with as well. So it comes with the person themselves. They have to take that on and are able to have that personal accountability. Obviously now I know what works for me. I know what I like. And obviously when I'm with my partner, if I'm ever with a partner, I can communicate that, and you can work on it. But it's just the communication. I feel like everything boils down to communication. Us getting this information is about communication. Us being able to apply is about communication. And sometimes, unfortunately, we've been taught to kind of like shut up and listen in that respect.
100%.
Especially in sex. I know like the English term is like lay there and think about the queen, and it's like, no.
No, 100%. And I agree 100%. It's communication. So, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be verbal communication. It could be non-verbal communication. But as long as you're communicating desire effectively, where your partner understands you and understands your needs and your wants, that's the most important thing. Because there are some cultures where, like there's some cultures, like from the Indian subcontinent, where women are taught, or even couples are taught, that the light should be off.
Oh wow.
There's cultures which teach that if a man looks at his woman's vulva or vagina, he'll go blind.
Oh wow.
There's cultures that believe that, or even like things like when people are taught that, I can't give oral sex to someone unless that's my husband or wife.
Yeah.
But then it's because it's what you've been told, but you're happy to have sex, but you can't have oral sex because you've been told that oral sex is like an act. And again, maybe that comes down to understandings that people have learned from interpretation of Christianity. Not all Christians believe this. that oral sex is seen part of sodomy, because in Old English language, sodomy includes anal intercourse as well as oral sex. So that's why you find some West Indians who don't believe that they should engage in oral sex. But funny enough, a number of those West Indian men, Jamaican men, they want to receive
exactly.
it. So again, it's this selfish attitude and this entitlement attitude that I'm entitled to pleasure, but you're not. And because with oral sex in particular, unless you're quite a selfish lover, a lot of people don't experience gratification from giving oral sex. They would rather receive it than give it, because they don't want to feel that they've being submissive in the bedroom to their partner, when in reality it should be a mutually exchanging act, that you want to give and receive pleasure.
Precisely, like an interchange. So we have Rija, she asked facts, but why does it hurt a man's ego when a woman tells a man that she's not satisfied? How can you explain it in a way where it doesn't hurt them? No.
That's a beautiful question. So there was two parts to that question. Why does a man feel? Why does it hurt a man's ego if a woman says she's not satisfied? Because, like I mentioned earlier, we've been led to believe that we're great in bed. So if in my mind, my previous sexual relationships have been great and I've been satisfied every woman I've been with, or most of them, then you're now telling me that you're not satisfied, then I would think naturally I've done something wrong, so playing to my insecurities. And for a lot of men, I'm not saying it should be like this, sex is a performative act in terms of I want to F-U-C-K-U, I want to do this to you. It's not about us experiencing pleasure together. So if you've told me you're not satisfied, then I would feel like I haven't done something right. So that's why I can, it's like criticism. A lot of people don't like receiving criticism. So that explains why a number of men don't like criticism, even though we need to hear it in the bedroom or outside the bedroom. Now, in terms of how to communicate that message, obviously it depends on the man, but it's important. It might be better to have that conversation outside of the bedroom. So you can talk about, and again, rather than just speaking about the negatives of what he didn't do, you can talk about, oh, I liked when you did X, Y, and Z, maybe you should do like more of it. So maybe when he was engaging in foreplay, you really enjoyed it, or non-penetrative play with you, to continue doing that, and then that got you really excited. So concentrate on what he did well, and then talk about, rather than just concentrating on what he didn't do. Because I think that way then he'll realise, okay, let me do more of that. But it's all about communication, and again, it's understanding his mindset, but just saying it in a way that is uplifting in a way, because again, I think a lot of men, our ego not only makes us better lovers, but it can make us the worst lovers as well, because if we feel that our ego is being abused, we're just not going to want to perform. Okay,
so it's like positive criticism, focus on what is going well, and I would say also like I message, like I feel like, and then when you do this, it's really, really nice, you know, or I feel like when you penetrate, it's a bit too hard, you know, so like that. So an I message would be better received than you penetrate too hard.
Yes, exactly. And again, it's like with men, give us like so if you said, if you're talking about what he did well, you're giving like a solution that if he did more of this, it'll be a more enjoyable experience for him. But if you're just talking about, you didn't do well in this, I'm not satisfied, then he's thinking, you know, all of my years of experience, I gave you the best I've got to offer, and you're telling me it's not. But then if you said, okay, this is what I like, then you're giving him a solution, and that's what we want, a solution. So don't just complain for the sake of complaining. Give him a solution at what he needs to do well, or what works well for you. If he's not willing to listen, then that's a problem. That's a different problem altogether. But at least you've communicated the situation to him.
Perfect. And then Ellie B goes, I feel like some men want women to feel guilty or feel like they are wrong for even wanting to be pleased. I had someone accuse me of loving sex as if it was a bad thing.
Yes, unfortunately you do have that in some, and I'm not going to, there are some men who've got these warped ideas that they believe that women shouldn't enjoy sex and sex should just be for the men. But again, that's their upbringing, which obviously I don't subscribe to or agree to, but it's important. That's why even before being intimate, having these conversations with your partner or your potential partner to understand how he views sex and intimacy, because he might be someone that thinks that, like you mentioned earlier, that you're just supposed to be someone that just lays down and thinks about England or the Queen. So again, that's why it's important that you're not with someone that is sexually immature.
Yeah, I like that, sexual maturity. So Eureka goes, you answered the question beautifully, mashallah. I hope this helps other women on how to approach the situation. That's lovely. So guys, we're about to go on a short recess or a short break on radio, but we'll still be on IG Live. So you guys can still come in and drop your questions and we'll answer them for you. On radio, we'll be back in about 1:10, so in like 10 minutes, 12 minutes. If you enjoyed the conversation and you want to like dial in, you can do that. The studio lines are 020-3735-8820, 020-3735-8820. Or you can also WhatsApp in if you're a bit shy. That's 077-8793-9958, 077-8793-9958. Or you can also join the Instagram Live as always. That's running, and that's at be.idole, so at beidole. And the Instagram Live will be also saved. Hopefully this week it will actually save on my timeline, guys. I know you guys asked about last week's episode. Somehow Instagram did not want to save it, but I'm sure this time it's going to behave itself. So we'll be back shortly in about 10 minutes. Okay. So I always leave this one running somehow. Or sometimes I split it into two, but I'm trying to think. Because obviously last week I had a whole amazing episode on Nyabingi. And it was like, the Rwandan warrior princess, and the whole thing didn't save.
Oh, wow.
Like, it didn't want to post. So maybe I'm going to try and split it this week just to make sure.
Yeah, okay, cool.
So guys,
Instagram increase. I thought it was only an hour you can save for.
No, you can save longer if it's an IG Live. So guys, I'm going to post this now, and then I'm going to do a part 2 because last week we had some technical difficulties saving it. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes with the part 2. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined us here right now in the live and has answered questions. Please be back in 10 minutes, yeah?